Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Luke. And you, my child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you'll go before our God to prepare the way for the promised one, giving the people the knowledge of salvation through forgiveness of their sins. Such is the tender mercy of our God, who from on high will bring the rising sun to visit us, to give light to those who live in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. In the meantime, the child grew up and became strong in spirit. He lived out in the desert until the day he appeared openly in Israel. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Daniel. And really thank you to the whole staff that covered for me during the writing leave. I think I finally learned my lesson not to take July off. I don't know why it took me this long, but July is always special session when the legislature is in session. And that's always means somebody's getting hunted. So I always have to leave writing leave to stand up for whoever's being attacked that particular year, whether it's feminism or LGBTQ people or Muslims or the homeless, or there's always somebody. This year it's voting rights. Back in the civil rights days, a great victory was won for voting rights by forcing the states that had Confederate histories that were very dubious when it came to protecting voting rights were asked to meet national standards. Recently, that was overturned by the Supreme Court. That great human rights victory was overturned by the Supreme Courts, and very quickly, the former Confederate states all began to limit how voting takes place. So I'm in Washington, D.C. Greetings. We've been marching all week, and we had lots of St. Andrews people showing up for the Poor People's Campaign, the last campaign that Dr. King took up in his life. And that voice, that torch is not extinguished. It's taking place still. But what I'd like to do is start a sermon series that's based on kind of healing our heart at a time like this, because I know so many people are experiencing despair. We thought we were past COVID, and partially because so many people have been in denial about COVID. We have a new variation that's going to put us back to square one in many places. In Vermont, they've moved beyond. They could, if they didn't have any element like that in Vermont, they could take the masks off and do all kinds of things. But because Florida and Texas and states like that don't believe in silly things like science, we can't move on beyond that. And then, you think of people who, for women's rights or LGBTQ rights, or seeing immigrants as human beings. There are just so many things that we think we've worked them out, and all of a sudden we find ourselves back, it seems, at square one. I don't think that's the fact, but it feels like that sometimes. So I want to talk about despair and how to get past that, and how to kind of heal our hearts as we go through these dry times, these times of waiting. Again, I think COVID has really been depressing to a lot of people, understandably. And one of the things I hear a lot is people feeling a bit of shame, or feel like they don't do enough, or they can't do enough, and they feel helpless. They don't know where to start, or they just don't feel like they have the energy. And I don't want people to feel like that. I don't think it's true. And I want to spend a little time this next month in healing those kinds of wounds, or doing what's possible in a sermon. There's only so much a sermon can do. But one of the things I used to do as a kid was invent songs for the road whenever my family went on trips, and games for the road. Of course, they're classic games that every family plays. You know, I Spy this or that. Things along the road, you're trying to figure them out, or songs that people sing. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what Scripture really is. When we talk about somebody like John the Baptist, we talk about somebody like Isaiah or even Jesus, we don't really know that much historically. I mean, just scientifically, you can't really get back to those days. There's so little evidence outside of Scripture. And I think that was never really the point anyway, to do a science book or a history book. It's always been songs for the heart that kind of escort us through the different passageways of life. And I think one of the things that our passage today is reminding us is that when horrible things are happening, or we're going through times of waiting, and so much of life is that, to realize that those setbacks are not the story of your life. Those setbacks are bad whether you're driving through on the way to a greater place. And the symbol of that is the promised land. And you have somebody like John the Baptist, who's leading people out of their confusion, whatever that darkness symbolizes, of despair, of depression. It's different at different times. But John the Baptist represents anyone who does that, right? I think there was probably a person named John the Baptist, but I think it's about you and me, and us helping ourselves and others through these kinds of times and preparing for something that's better and more hopeful. I had a really interesting month, very strange writing leave this month, July. I was walking about halfway through, I was kind of going through my note cards, and I walked by my storage bin, and it looks like it's been exploded. It looks like it's been hit by a missile. And it just very bewildering. I look at it, and then no, it can't be that. So I start to walk away, then go back, and yes, it's basically everything I own that's been devastated. And I didn't find out about it for 2 weeks. So there were people going in with knives and things and cutting things up and stealing things. And then I moved some of the stuff to another storage thing by my patio, and somehow the fire spigot that triggers water if there's a fire, that went off somehow. And I'm sitting in Washington, and they didn't send my luggage with me. So it's a strange month, and it's almost comical how these kinds of things happen. But I'm such a person of privilege that I can basically lose everything, all of the objects that I own, and still not go hungry, still not fear for the future kind of thing. So I think to realize that when we have these very strange times, what we're saying in our hearts is what determines whether there's hope or not for the journey. That if I see these things as happening as my story, that's going to be very sad, very frustrating. I struggle a lot more with frustration than with depression. I'm probably too arrogant to get depressed, but I do get very frustrated and sometimes way too easy. But I think what's being said is the song that's in our heart is probably the most important part of our lives in so many ways, because everything changes. We lose everything along the way. But if we can remember that life is that change, life is a river, that we lose everything, but we're going somewhere on that journey. And I think John the Baptist is trying to say that. This passage is very interesting. It says, "You, my child, will be called prophet of the Most High." Now, why character that as a child, if not to speak to us, right? That promise that's in every human being, that there's a sense in which every child feels themselves called somehow to make this a better world. It says, you will go before our God to prepare for the promised one. You will bring a rising sun to visit us. That's that idea of the eternal dawn. To give light to those who live in darkness, to turn their feet to the ways of peace. And then it finishes meantime. And I love that because most of life is meantime, right? Most of it's waiting. Most of it's not these climactic moments of success and victory. And most of it's in between. So it's meantime, the child grew and waited in the desert until he appeared openly. So this is like, I think, a masterful dramatic touch to say that if you looked at what was happening around them, there was nothing but frustration and despair. Things were not going to get better anytime soon. But what gave John the Baptist joy was this message, this song that he was singing in his heart. Now, I have to confess, I always disliked John the Baptist. He seems like a really mean person, like a critic and I think I was projecting Texas preachers onto the story. Instead, what I think John the Baptist symbolizes, and I think liberal Christians, progressive liberal Christians, we need to hear this, is you can't get to the love of Christ until you've passed through the justice of John the Baptist. We can talk about loving everyone, but if there are people who can't vote in a democracy, if there are people who can't get medicine, if there are people who can't get paid a living wage for their jobs, then there's no point in talking about loving them. And the history of this nation has some wonderful moments, some moments of justice. It also has some moments of tremendous injustice. And that's what we need to change. If we want a song of joy in our hearts, to get to the love we all want to have for one another, we have to pass through justice. Now, what that means is John the Baptist isn't going to get there, right? He is a medium on which other people are going to pass over, but he himself will not get there. Remember when Martin Luther King said, I've been to the mountaintop, I see the future, but I may not be able to get there with you. And everybody in their heart realized, well, probably he wasn't. And the reason he didn't was he started talking about economics. I mean, you can't say why somebody gets shot, but when he was just talking about civil rights, that was dangerous enough. But when he started taking up the Poor People's Campaign and linking racism with the economic system and bringing up things like the Klan was not designed to go after Black people first. It was designed to go after white people who didn't mistreat people of color. So there was an economic base to the hatred in America. That it's not that people just dislike people because they have a different skin tone. It's that when they got here, they wanted the land. And so they dehumanized people of color who were here originally. I mean, you have to be pretty insane, I think, to invade a land, take over from the people, break treaties, and then call them the aliens. I mean, you have to be pretty screwed up in your mind to say we're a nation of laws and those people there are illegal aliens trying to get on our property when the land you're standing on was stolen by your ancestors from their ancestors. So it's very, very crazy. But this is a message of hope. And that's what we have to realize. It's not denial. It's not pretending like we're going to turn everything around anytime soon. We may not turn it around within our own lifetimes, but that does not need to cause us despair. This is one of those sermons where I came up with the title of the sermon before I really came up with any of the content of the sermon, which is always a mistake because I'm not really sure how the two connect sometimes. And the title is Butterflies Are Born in the Darkness. And I'm thinking of cocoons. I'm just thinking as we return from COVID, it won't be as quickly as we want to now with the Delta, but there are things we can do. We can really see this as a creative opportunity and to realize that some of the most important things that have ever happened in human history have been born out of times like this, of waiting, of despair, of frustration, of not being able to turn things around. That's what I love about that line that starts "in the meantime," because that's where we always are. Very few moments of the crests and the terrible waves. It's like most of the time is waiting for something to happen. And there's a song we can be singing in our heart. There is a parade we can join. One version of that is the Poor People's Campaign, and a lot of you marched in that. A lot of you have supported that. A lot of you watched it online, spread the word about it. That all counts. That's all the same parade. But there are other ways to look at it. I know in the middle of the week, Jesse Jackson showed up for the march. We were, I can't remember, I think we were in Round Rock at that time. And all of a sudden you look up and there's Jesse Jackson. And what that reminded me is this has been a long, bloody road, right? And we can't lay the torch down from people who suffered so much and struggled so much and so courageously to get to where we are now. Yes, we lose ground sometime, but we never have to move back. We keep going in the parade. And that's the story of John the Baptist, that the stones the builders rejected have become the chief cornerstones of this new temple, of all the rejected people. And all of the privileged people who will leave their privilege in order to join the parade. I was standing by a woman as we marched, and she just kind of broke out the song, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. And when I heard her sing it, I realized that was not just a protest song that she chose. That was a song of her heart. That was a song that helped her get through times of abuse, frustration, despair, that she was set on a new land. And just as John the Baptist talked about the promised land, she was longing for promised land. I woke up this morning with my heart set on freedom, my mind set on freedom. Now, the most important thing I have to say today is if you've been feeling like you don't do enough, or you haven't done enough, or you can't do enough, I really want to challenge that belief, particularly if you are part of the St. Andrews community. Please hear this. I could not do a tenth of the things I do if it were not the community of St. Andrews. If I had an average church, if I had an average job, I would be in the same situation you were in. I'm able to do what I do because of you. Some of you, it's support financially. If you wonder why I'm a workaholic, can you imagine when you answered the mail and you looked at it and you saw somebody who you know is a shut-in with a fixed income that is faithfully sending donations in each month? Now, I've never looked inside to see what people give. I've never, in the however many years it is I've been in the ministry, if I find out what somebody gives, it's because they told me. I never look at the finances to find that out. Because I think it's the whole package. There are people who can't give any money, and yet they come and support the food pantry or the homeless ministry. And you know what I think is the most important role of all? And you're not going to believe this, but it's true, I think, is the people who are loving and friendly bring in more resources than anybody else. I've heard so many people say, I came to San Andreas because I heard of your sermons. but I stayed at St. Andrews because so-and-so called me when I was sad or depressed, or somebody smiled at me when I came in and it made me feel like $1 million. See, that all counts. And the activism, that's important, but it's not complete, right? That's not a whole community. And the financial giving, that is great. We'd be in a world of hurt. I cannot believe that we're not in a world of hurt, that you've so faithfully been able to give. But it all counts. If you can't give money or if you can't do activism, that doesn't take one iota away from the gift you are giving. So as John the Baptist prepares people, he's out in the wilderness. That's where all the rejected people go. I think we get Palm Sunday backwards. You're going out into the wilderness and bringing the people in that the church is told they don't have worth, they don't have value, because to God they are of ultimate value in John the Baptist's story. So this is a time of great setbacks. I'm hoping we can spend a little time this month challenging that idea that you don't bring worth to the struggle, challenging the idea that these times when we can't seem to make progress are of less worth than the times when we have victories, because I think they're of more worth. It's people that keep the candle burning in the middle of the night, in that heart of darkness that's there. It's the people who faithfully keep a lantern burning that give humanity hope to go on and keep going on. I don't know if there really was a John the Baptist, but I know there are many people in history that have played this role, and I know that you and I are invited to play that role in our own particular way, to invite people to something better, to not let the abuses that happen in the world extinguish the flame of joy that's in our heart. Even if you look around and you see nothing but darkness, there is still a light there. If you realize the gift that you bring to the world, if you realize that you are a light for the world, what is happening to you is not your real life story. Your real life story is the song that you are singing in your heart. And if you can't find a heart this day, remember a woman who was marching from Georgetown to Austin, Texas, because somebody was trying to take away her right to vote, and she was tired, and she may not have felt any hope whatsoever, but she sang that song. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Well, that's my understanding of our passage. We set aside a moment each week for you to think about how you would understand these words. Thank you for your attention.